Welcome, welcome, people. The irresistible, the magisterial, the luscious, once almost Egyptian president in the year 2017 of Egypt, Mohammed Salah has sunk the All Whites today. It's a sad day.
God
It's a sad
damn it.
day here parts, and yet we soldier on because we told ourselves, much like the previous episode, that whether Egypt wins or not, we will continue to soldier on and do what we need to do vis-a-vis Aristotle's metaphysics. So you're joined here by Luca Teller and Alex Connor McLean. How are you feeling, my co-host?
I'm feeling brilliant. I'm in such a good mood. It was disappointing second half for the Kiwis to go down to that strong Egyptian nation. um, yeah, but hey, we move forward. This podcast moves forward. The momentum continues. The revolution continues to unfold, and I'm more excited and ready than ever for a podcast of this sort of depth for a subject of conversation that is extending to something that we presuppose all of us in our lives actually to bring some conscious light and life to it is going to be fantastic.
It certainly will be. It certainly will be, my friend. Today's focus will revolve around the next book in the greater book of the Metaphysics called Book Iota. And I think this is Aristotle kind of at his most systematic yet again, is what I found as I was reading through it. The entire book is about the general grounds of intelligibility. And this is a topic that's been hovering and sometimes more prevalent in previous books, sometimes not so much, but a very basal concept in metaphysics and philosophy, more proper, is the grounds of intelligibility. And this is Aristotle at his, I love this word, peacocking, systematic best, tackling it in Aristotelian fashion. Also, in typical philosophers' fashion, straying away from, I found, and wanting to move away from unintelligibility. And I guess at times even treating unintelligibility reductively for the purposes of this book as that which is chaotic and ultimately undesirable. So these will all be good sub branches to riff off of. But yeah, he was back to his systematic and elaborate best, I think. And there was a lot of sense of, yeah, irreconcilable and reconcilable opposites, as is always the case in philosophy a lot of times, or something that is not in itself its own essence and is to be sublated. Um, and yeah, I was even thinking of another video I've made on this channel, if you'd like to go check it out, dear viewer, from the Nietzsche series, where I analyze Thus Spake Zarathustra. And one of the chapters in particular in one of the videos on screen now is about how Megamind and Metroman from the classic Disney movie from the 2000s are perfect epitomes of perfect opposites, and how the relationship transpires is a perfect metaphor for life and growth itself. The yin yang symbol also came to the fore multiple times for me reading through book Iota. So that's kind of Megamind and Metroman, but in a deeper, fleshed out, nurtured, and ensouled way, you could say. Apologies, I'm cooked and crook. And another line I'm really a fan of is that the cream doesn't always rise to the top, but what is at the top is necessarily cream. And in the case of book Iota, what we were looking at and what Aristotle was tackling, actually more true to the text, was the difference that we can perceive, that we can interpret as human beings in our experience of reality, but that difference which is ultimately undergirded or presupposed by unity in one way or another. In terms of a subjective reading experience, I found the first half pretty okay, and even, I wouldn't say like enticing or exciting, but it was readable. And I get the sense we're going to focus more on the first half today anyway, because there's a lot of material there. There's a lot to get to and through. But the second half kind of droned on, and it was a bit wearisome. And yeah, you just kind of thought, okay, he's actually doing his job here. He's being really rigorous and examining what needs to be. But I just felt like I wasn't as mentally checked in for the ride for the second half of this. But we'll get to that when we get to that. Any thoughts so far, sir?
Well, when you're studying or analyzing the seed of something, and if you're a geneticist, you care about what's there at the start, and then as it unfolds and branches out and grows into a tree, sure, that's great, but it was the genetic code at the origin that was most monumentous and revelatory. And so it's a little bit like Aristotle being the geneticist of being. And yeah, at the start, he kind of unloads and gives us the big kind of the senses of unity of being, as you said, the ground of intelligibility. And so yeah, it's kind of, this chapter has been structured around being very potent and substantive at the start, and then later on, yeah, it's kind of clarifying and reifying. And so I think for this episode, it's going to be immensely interesting to take up some of those initial ideas of Aristotle to allow to pollinate our souls and our psyches, and then for us to also feed in and input our own musings on the unities of being. We both have diverse backgrounds. We both have this deep desire of self-knowledge and self-mastery, and part of that self-knowledge, as we've said, extends into the transject and objective knowledge. So there's a lot that we have to bring to the fore. There's a lot that we have to add to this discussion. Yeah, and I think as well in what you're saying, yeah, both of us kind of almost sounding, maybe feeling a little bit sick, like here we are in sickness and in health till death do us part. We will be putting out these episodes for you guys.
Yeah, that really topped it. Nothing could sever this connection, my good man. And I think you should also leave some space for the noble men out of us who aren't geneticists, who still also want to explore and master themselves and aren't so predicated on what was once the case. And yeah, anyway, there's plenty of
Aristotle doing the metaphysics is like a geneticist, right? Like what generates, what is the thing that nothing is prior, like that's him in his niche when he's doing metaphysics, for sure. Then you get to like poetry and the arts and what he's doing, that's all like, yeah, the different things that have come from it. But yeah, here that's very much his remit, isn't it?
Certainly, yeah, and he is remarkably good at it. He draws from his predecessors and kind of anticipates his successors remarkably well, as we've spoken about in some of the earlier episodes, where he sometimes admonishes them seemingly snarkily, with a grimace to his nature, but ultimately does coalesce them all and synthesize them and then contribute.
Yeah, the lineage that comes from Aristotelian metaphysics is immense. And when you think about Neoplatonism as the synthesis between Platonic and Aristotelian modes of thought, you get a tradition that is dialectical and moves along the Silk Road, and so connects a lot of these Western to Eastern trade routes, and connects it with a mythopoetic substructure of ideas and insights. And so you have this, like, it is literally a pollination from Athens and other Sumerian geographies out to the rest of the world, and makes contact with Eastern philosophies and comes back. So that really got wheels. The Neoplatonic Silk Road really got wheels from the synthesis of Aristotle, and so you couldn't have Neoplatonism without Aristotle. And there's a really profound way of thinking, and it's largely this influence on me has come from John Vervaeke and his championing of Neoplatonism as a way to be connected to the cosmos intimately. And so there's real legs that it has today in contemporary philosophy and cognitive science, when we look at the structures of intelligibility, the structures of way that things have meaning to us, when we look at things psychologically, when we look at them analytically, when we look at them metaphysically, and when we look at them linguistically, there's a common trope there. So that's the kind of thing that we are looking to discuss. And yeah, just wanted to kind of give some credit to the tradition that Aristotle upholds and what he has been able to achieve here, which is very remarkable and something that's still relevant and still vanguard today. Like, it's still on the border limits that some people haven't even been able to properly synthesize or come around to yet. So it's brilliant.
Yeah, I think as we've gone further and further and voyaged through the book, I've realized that I actually just respect Aristotle more and more as a thinker and as a polymath. And I think when we started this series, I thought he was a prescient thinker who could prophesize many things to our age today. But I didn't realize that he's prescient even today. I don't know why. I instinctively charted him in my brain as someone who, comes to a close today, and everything he said was great because he said it well earlier and it's still relevant today.
Mm,
But no, he
mm.
said stuff that we don't actually know how to reconcile in our minds and hearts yet today. And it's funny because he doesn't always speak from a position of heart, and yet there is still that, yeah, affect.
That's the trip. That's the trip. Yeah. You read like Platonic dialogues and you go, oh, they're going to be super smart for 2000 years ago, right? Like they're going to be like just discovering these real primitive things that we now know so well. And all of a sudden you enter into this dialogue and it's like teaching you things about your own soul that you never knew. And that's the whole ride.
Even perfectly placed and poised to have been released 2000 years from now. And maybe that the generation and the civilization that we would have then, the transhumanists from our vantage point, would find it to be more of a pushing up against the box, and they would actually be able to wrestle with it because they themselves would be better placed.
And do you know what? They're putting us close to source. They're putting us to intellecti, to divine intellect. And it's that being that close to that source is going to have that kind of affect, that kind of effect and affect.
Yes, yes, it will. I'll just finish the intro, but just to say, when you were talking, I wasn't laughing at you. I was laughing with you because what was evoked as you bring up Silk Road, Eastern and Western trade routes, and the mythopoetic, only Alexander Bard comes to mind. So that's what I was laughing at, not at you, my good man. Well,
Well,
yeah,
and I really appreciate it. John Viveki also has this series on, like, he's doing the Silk Road seminars now, and he was doing this pilgrimage to the Silk Road for that. So yes, Alexander Bard is for sure like one of the prominent thinkers of that line of kind of historiography. But also John Viveki is come online to that too,
yeah.
among many others that we just haven't kind of surfaced to us yet.
Yes, and there's a worthwhile piecemeal contribution happening from all angles of and pockets of the digital culture today to do with the ineffable one. And I've heard the term negative theology thrown around a lot. I don't know much about it. But yeah, as this, ultimately very all-encompassing trade route and a birther of metaphysical possibilities. And yeah, it's something I want to look into more properly and get to a closer stage with. But on the topic of book IOTA, the other thing that Aristotle does really well to bring up is introducing difference as distinct from distinction, and contradiction and contradistinction. So he kind of, this is what I meant where by what he was doing in this book to be rather systematic and taxonomic, even where here are the like bounds and grounds for this, and then here are the endpoints, and here are the lines, and here's where we're not actually talking about distinction anymore. We're talking about contradistinction. And maybe that was just the secondhand analysis I got, where those were the terms being used to explain it, and he doesn't use those specifically. But what I found to be particularly precipitory, I think that's a word, is that he does all of this under the model of a continuum. So it's almost like there's these brackets, but the brackets exist on a wider, endless virtual space field on which there are categories, but the categories have finitude, but on an underlying infinity. So that kind of just re-evoked that whole sentiment of difference being presupposed by unity. And that was kind of a motif, you could even say, running through this entire book.
And unity being presupposed by difference, like that was my first thought when I was reading through this chapter on unity. I was like, what about difference? And what about the way that unity can only exist in the context of knowing difference as well? So for me, that was like the first thing that I really like that stuck out to me of, okay, what would I want to contribute to this conversation that Aristotle is bringing to the fore?
I'm so excited that I'm sick and you're a bit under the weather today as well, because this is just seriously like philosophy as physiology. We're going to have a completely different shade and grade to ourselves presented today. And I have a feeling this is going to be a touchstone episode, and perhaps the most mystical one yet, one where we go, this, and I strongly feel it, but that, and then we get dejected, and then we get equally ejected about the this, the new this, and yeah, constant change.
Well, why don't we just make this an ejaculative mystical episode? Yeah, I think we're also both a bit under the weather because we're just too sick with it.
You'll always get a
Sick with
sympathy.
these ontic ideas and these metaphysics. Hey, this is going to be a spectacular episode. I'm looking forward to. Like, I have this piece of art in my home, and it's called eccentric and concentric circles, and it's like perfectly this. To me,
Wait,
it's like it
what
is
is it?
the
It's called "Don't Worry About
this
Consent."
I'm just going to uphold it here because it like kind of perfectly shows what I'm trying to get at in words. It's this way in which, there's almost nothing here, but there's everything here if you would only but contemplate it. And it's this complete unity, but it's also this like fragmentation. And so that's what we're discussing today from my eyes.
I think that was really pivotal what you just said in terms of like a throwaway statement. You said, if only we would but contemplate it. There is nothing there. Like there is literally nothing there
No, and
until
that's purely the artistry of this thing, because you don't look at it like you do look at it and it strikes you as beautiful, but it only becomes ever deeper in that beauty when you contemplate it.
every center of reality grappling and fashioning anew, constructing reality thereby. And to start us off, this quote is from a book called Music, the Brain and Ecstasy, on screen now. I couldn't recommend it more. It's a lengthy one. It's not going to stoke your gears, but it's going to set the tone and the undertone for this episode. While philosophers and physicists forever argue about the absolute nature of time, neuropsychologists take a more pragmatic view. For them, it's nonsense to speak of an infinitesimal present, of a present that is really not there at all. Laboratory work shows that when events occur extremely quickly or extremely slowly, the nervous system simply doesn't sense them. Whatever truths the physicist's instruments or the philosopher's deductions may tell, for the psychologist, the quote-unquote present has a finite, measurable extent. It is the minimum time it takes to sense, perceive, and categorize, and it is dictated by the speed at which neurons fire. This duration is called the perceptual present. Its classic definition was given by the American philosopher William James over a century ago. He says, the practically cognized present is no knife edge, but a saddleback with a certain breadth of its own on which we sit perched, and from which we look in two directions in time. But the question becomes, how broad is that saddle that he speaks of? The practically cognized present, he says, is no knife edge, but a saddleback. So how long does it take for immediate experience to fade? And what does that tell us about reality and human nature? When we say right now, the here now, and what does that even mean? And what are the outer limits of that? What's the there then?
Yeah, I love a bit of William James and have kind of been drawn towards him, like as a Virgo and being, practically minded and wanting to ground things. William James was the great American pragmatist. So pragmatism is one of my core 5 philosophical identities. And so it brings me such joy to find him here popping up in such a incredibly potent and relevant way. And yeah, he's kind of a great synthesizer, really, and he expounds and expands on the subject of philosophy and psychology originally. So it's in a pragmatic way where it's kind of like, okay, we have all these questions and ideas that we could pursue. Here's our line in the sand. Here's how we determine truth. Truth grows as a muscle. The more we exercise it, there's no like idealization of it. And yeah, the perceptual present, I think as well, it's some of the critique that I've heard of Aristotle from a certain process philosopher, Matt Segal, and to say that Aristotle's metaphysics works very good for the medium-sized things moving at medium speed, under average circumstances. But when we push it to the extremes, when we push it to these like hard limit cases in physics and in biology, we don't get those same metaphysics upholding, that there is a bit of that looping effect, a bit of the observer effect, a bit of the space-time continuum that breaks down, a little bit of determinism through genetic nature. And so there's, what you're saying in that quote is a little bit of, okay, in this perceptual present, maybe Aristotle is your guy, but then if you want to stretch the perceptual present, if you want to get to a mystical territory, you actually might have to leave him where he is, go on the journey, and then find him again right in that pocket.
Absolutely. I do think this is another one of those things that Aristotle does presage as well in his own works, maybe not in this one particularly, but I almost feel like from the ethics, I'm reading out, our discussion will be adequate if it has as much clarity as the subject matter admits. But his answer to that, I guess, rebuke thousands of years later would be that the things I'm talking about just aren't the things that you're talking about because your reality is different. And it's probably not, and it probably is. And I don't know where to come down on that, but it's almost like he says, well, this is the bulk case, this is the bulk scenario. And yeah, I kind of acknowledge that it only makes sense 95% of the times, and there's 2.5% on either side, fringe, extreme, anomalous cases. But given that the subject matter doesn't admit of the anomalous, I think we're fine.
What does the subject matter for today admit of?
It admits of a Voyager's recap from you now.
Sure thing. Yeah, and I think before I embark on that voyage, I just want to bring up and surface one more thing that has come from this discussion, which is just to help us frame it. And yeah, I'll actually start that framing in the recap because in episode 14, 2 episodes ago, we discussed the deduction of philosophy's starting point, the 0, coordinates, the key concept and the key founding text of metaphysics for one of the key thinkers of the whole of the Western philosophical tradition. So it's really going back to, in multiple ways, stripping back to like, okay, let's remove this property, let's remove that attribute, like let's go back to the substance. That is to go back to like Aristotle's substance, essentially. And we weren't just looking at what Aristotle says with his substance, but we were looking at what his substance can be made to say, and how we apply that to more relevant areas like physics, ethics, and technology, grappling with those key subjects when we look to the real. Those are the key subjects that matter, like physics, ethics, technology, are all super potent. Also, like the subject, the subjective, I think that was a part of it, but yeah, almost putting that in its own category. And so when we think about that starting coordinate, the 0, like if the 0 is substance, then what the subject is in this present episode is the matrix that those coordinates sit within, right? It's, as you said, the ground of intelligibility. It's the plane that gives us any sense to understand what something, like to understand how a coordinate 0 makes any sense. It's that fundamental orientation that gives us the ability to understand things. And so if we have the ability to understand things and we go to the most basic understanding of things, we arrive at substance. But that presupposes a lot. You can't start at substance. You have to take that step back further to go, how can I be, you have to go to epistemology in a sense. How can I know what I know? What is my theory of knowledge? What is that tied to? And so the justification of that through rational, intuitive, testable ways, in a sense.
And
in the last
and it's worth
episode, then,
very early on in this book, Aristotle really paid a lot of worth and gave a lot of exaltation to replicability. And I almost feel like there's a resurfacing of that same strand here, where how do I know that what I'm feeling is something that can be mapped onto a paper, and not in a cheap way, but how do I really testify my epistemic structures, and replicability being a way or a very reliable mode for that.
Yeah, you can't do metaphysics with a knot that you can never tie the same way. You can undo it at any point, but at least you can tie it back up in the same way. If you didn't have that, then you wouldn't have any sense to metaphysics. Something to be meaningful has to have a certain reference that is determinate and that is consistent. So yeah, things like intelligibility as such, needing something that has a common reference point. Without it, we wouldn't have any sense, we wouldn't have intelligibility. So yeah, that's the level of that this discussion invites us to and invites the listeners to. So to do a pretty succinct recap, in episode 15, in episode theta, we looked at the ethical instructive philosophies. We kind of began our conversation by this, confessing that we wanted to balance Aristotle and to up the relevance side of him, even in his metaphysics, rather than just emphasizing the truth. And I think Aristotle is a master of truth and relevance. And in some of his other works, he's really leaning into relevance, like his art of persuasion, his art of communication, these different, there's even like those common storytelling tropes of the logos, mythos, and pathos in storytelling that we still teach and learn about Aristotle because he knew it so well. So that oratorial tradition is where Aristotle is giving credit to the relevance, and then this book on metaphysics is where he's giving credit to the truth. But we want to go into his ultimate truth telling and try and make it ultimate relevance telling as well. That's kind of one of these quests that we've been on. And part of where that gets us to is to think about ethics and how does this understanding of metaphysics and substance give us an ethical instruct? How does it inform us? How can we conform to reality? How can it give us a way forward, a path of action, rather than just an account of what is? Like, that's all very useful, but to up the relevance would be to then say, and then what? Like, to act further and to and to progress and prolong what we've discovered. Yeah, and then when we got into Aristotle's concepts proper, we were looking at various kind of tension points and I guess tonoses, creative tensions that there are in substance, and specifically in the duality of potentiality versus actuality. So we call that a tonos because it's a creative tension. The tonos of something is like a tension, but it's like a tension that's strung on a guitar where it's actually at this right level of tension that you can have something creative produce of it. Like when you play the strings on a guitar, there's a tension there that is allowing it to create a really harmonious musical tone, and to have a unique timbre, a unique sound. And so that's the kind of tensions that we were exploring in Aristotle. First one, and the key one that we were ultimately diving in, was potentiality versus actuality, and the different framing that Aristotle gives to that is how we're to understand substance. We're to understand substance as always innately having potentiality and actuality, and that's kind of how he gives us this account of like the substantial, the thing, but also the process and the movement. How innately when we go to what something is, there's this process of becoming and a process of actualizing, and almost a process of self-negation to move forward in that movement. We looked at rational versus irrational potencies, a really great discussion there on the hero's myth. But before I get to that, jumping the gun a little bit, a rational potency was something that could choose this way or that as its potential. So you have the potential to make a choice. You could walk left, you could walk right, but the flame doesn't have the ability to choose if it's going to be hot, if it's going to heat something, or if it's going to cool something. This flame is an irrational potential because it can only actualize itself through the vehicle of one potentiality. And so when we actually went into that more, when me and my good friend Luca entered into dialogos around that idea, what was revealed and taught to us was that in the hero's myth, you have this distinction, like potential is very potent. There's so much placed on that. Like, what could your potential be? What could you do? You actually could ascend to the divine on earth. You could be an amazing sage and philosopher. You could be you could be a poetic ruler. Like, that all exists as a reality for you, but is contained within this bed of potential. And so within potential, there is just this divine energy and spirit that is but waiting for you to turn to it and to actualize it, to give it power. And when we look to the hero's myth, and when we look to something like here at Harry Potter, we can see how that kind of potential that's there for the hero is both rational and irrational. Aristotle would say it's not possible for something to be, both rational, irrational, in that sense that there's a logical difference between them, and there's actually, you can't logically have them be one and the same. But we would say that for the hero's journey, Harry Potter had the rational potential to be the irrational hero in a sense. He had only one determination in his life, and it was to be the rational agent who chooses between good and evil ultimately and fulfills that journey of spirit. And we also saw that it's actually also decided from the start that Harry Potter is going to be that character. Like, that irrational potential of you are the marked and the chosen one, you only have one destiny, is the scar that he has. And yeah, so it kind of goes from the rational to the irrational and back to the rational when we analyze a myth like that. And we also looked at how, this concept of impossible for Aristotle is when a potential can never be actualized, that's when it's impossible. So he doesn't want to say that there's a such thing that exists as a potential that could never be actualized. That's actually what he would just call the impossible, and kind of hardens that off. We also, discussed eternal recurrence and repetition, which was, very, very apt for the subject when talking about potential and what could be, and how you're always confronting what could be in every moment of your life and in your choices. When you're, I guess, on that saddleback of attention, and you can look forward and you can look backwards, you can see the potential of the past and you can see the potential of the present. You can see the potential of the past because you can look back at your history and all of these things about you and take stock of that. And I guess, like, the way memory is selective and attention is selective, and how the stories we tell of our past can determine who we are. And so when we look back to our past, there is a kind of potential there to alchemize it and to take forward what we want and to hold at bay things that we don't want about ourselves. And that's this whole process of maturity, is like learning to unlearn things and learning to see our future. And when we look forward on that saddleback, you can also see the potential of the future, which is yet to be actualized. So it's almost a more potent form of potential. It's more possible than impossible. Yeah, how can we not be coming recurringly to a place of seeing ourselves not actualize that potential? Like, how can we actually take it and embrace it and then lead with it? And as a response to Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. But also, we discussed how that eternal recurrence is more like a feature of the fact of change, that when we come to the footstool of eternal recurrence and this capital T time, what we are coming in contact with is the fact of change rather than any specific thing that changed itself. And so there's a way that our Dasein is always placed in an eternal recurrence of change. Yeah, I think that captures most of what I'd want to say about the episode prior. And I think, like, even to begin with, and it was something that we touched on throughout and right to the end, was how this exercise is transformative rather than informative. And when we're seeing what Aristotle can say, we were taking Aristotle, who can be very informational, and trying to make him transformational. That was kind of the spirit. That was the mercurial spirit that was with us in the last episode. And as Mercury comes up, I'll also say from the offset that we'd also want the Mercury to be guiding us in this journey today as we seek the mystical and we seek to find and retrieve and transcribe messages from, past the chthonic gates of Hades, like to actually go into the, negative theology and non-being as our starting point. So yeah, looking forward to the transformation that this ensues. But before that, I'd like to hear your response.
I think that was a perfect capping off, especially at the end. Yeah, that's what we're here to do. We're here to utilize the transformation that occurs, be informed as a result and as such, so that we can conform, and so that our meaning making and sense making apparatus can conform deeply with reality itself in the way, in a deep coupling that grounds us, that ends up being the grounds of us and of ours, and done so in a way that requires genuine work upwards and genuine processes of individuation, not through deceit or subterfuging our way there. The etymology of individuation is also to do with indivisibility and being undivided. So to be a unity upon oneself and unto oneself is also going to be a core theme of this episode, of course, given that we're speaking about difference and the unity that underlies that. So I think you capped it off perfectly. I also felt that eternal recurrence in particular was a particularly potent discussion we had, and fit really well in the context of that discussion. I think we actually genuinely covered some new ground there. So for viewers of the channel and of the series, if you would like to go back and watch that, do so. I'd highly recommend it. I almost feel like we actually covered something genuinely new and contributed to the zeitgeist there. It's a shame that we each had a flash of insight that vanished and left us vanquished at the end of it, but ultimately, no harm, no foul.
Yeah, it's like we generally contributed something new to the zeitgeist, and imagine if we could remember what the insight was. Like we were just grasping at straws, trying to see and put that out there for people, but it was more the oscillation and the circumambulation of that idea that was so rich for us.
Yeah, and we use this terminology before as well, of vultures circling its prey before it just swoops down. I think there's a circumnavigatory element and sentiment to what we're doing here, where we're trying to zero in. We also can contradictorily said that we're trying to zero out when we're zeroing in, and that's how you're zeroing in and getting to the soul and essence of something, is by zeroing out towards it. The movement generally is a it's a vacillation from the one, the unified, to the infinite, and these terms are fraught with conflation, but say from the multiplis or multiplicitous and the pluralistic to the one and the graspable, the effable, and all of this ultimately in a way to move us upwards and to individuate ourselves and the world thereby. Make what is ambiguous a bit more ambiguous, because as we saw in the first line of this book, man by nature desires to know. So even though we both disagree with that somewhat and in different ways, here we are still queer and endeavoring on this, embarking. So yeah, so please subscribe.
Still here, still queer, still creating words. Ambiguous is the latest one.
And I also want to just pay heed to what you said about the mercurial spirit. I think caprice is a necessity here, the erratic, and that distinguished from simply the disorderly. We're not just talking about absence of order. We're talking about the genuinely not ineffable, but elusive, and kind of the trickster element of there but not quite, and there but only existing in the lines between the things that are actually there, and bearing and living an existence in those liminal spaces, I guess you could say. But that is a character and a soul feature that you must carry on your shoulder in any upward ascent. Is Jordan Peterson on one shoulder, Sam Harris on the other.
to zero in and to zero out.
Yeah, like the last thing you want is to feel like you're getting somewhere with all this. And you even remarked on this rather eloquently in one of the previous discussions. You said, gosh, we're not trying to resolve anything. Checking out before we even do anything.
Josh, we're not
So
trying to like give an answer here.
book Iota, if we go back to the book for a second, and then we'll do our preambles and ambles to come till time infinitum forever, I'm sure. But to go to the book for a second, do you want me to start it off?
By the way, our preambles are the biggest ambles I've ever seen. An amble is to walk slow. Our fucking preambles, bro, is like 2 kilometers an hour walking speed. We're just like slowly trudging through it, like admiring all this precious scenery, admiring the path we're on, and like learning things about it. And that's the preamble.
It's truly paradoxical that I'm really lubricated and warmed up currently, but also exhausted, and I'm kind of ready to call it quits on this book as well. But yeah, he basically starts off Iota with giving us a bit of a kind of a map, you could say, for senses of unity, he calls it. What are the different ways that one is one? What are the ways of being one? And then he will go through them and kind of back and forth, if you'd like, about each of the four qualities he lays out. But to just state it outright to begin with, the four of them are, and I quote, continuity, being a whole, being a specific unity, and being a numerical unity. So continuity is just what is, I think, for him, the intuitively naturally continuous. And I was using the human being as a form or as a existent substance that kind of maps onto this. Like it helps when we're talking about the four causes, for example, to talk about a chalice or a goblet. I don't know why it has to be like a Harry Potter type item like that. It just sounds more ooh, and it also seeps into your brain a bit quicker that way.
Yeah. Why does a symbol need to have a rich and potent symbolism? Why does the sacred need to have reverence? Like when we think to Aristotle's discourse on this, and when we look at the ways that certain artifacts are produced of this, like the one, unity itself, pure unity, is like this very mystical and revered sense, and when we try and ascend to it spiritually and even dialectically through understanding it, we get to a place of incredible aporia and feeling like this is really cosmic and profound. And for me, like materially, how we set things up, like in the chalice or in these other objects that hold such a potent energy, like why is it not just a glass cup? Why is it a chalice that is filled, that captivates us more and that more perfectly symbolizes these things that are deep? I was also thinking about this in the sense of why we want to ritualize these things and come into relation to them in a sacred mode. And it's, partly a Catholic heritage that gives me the deep appreciation and respect for not only tradition, but the beatific vision, like beatific tradition, the ways that we like have architecture that is a part of the liturgy, and we have a priest in a certain role, dressed in a certain way according to a certain calendar that is part of the liturgy, and we have these reenactment of Stations of the Cross or the nativity scene. Like it's riddled with these, even the drinking of wine and breaking of bread is this ritual that we return to week in and week out. And for me, like what really like worked for me in my psyche is how these sacred objects help structure our psyche in a subconscious and fundamental way, that we actually need objects of sacredness. We need icons in our lives. We need art in our lives. Hey, did you know if you didn't have art, it wouldn't be the same? You wouldn't be here. You have art in your life, whether you like it or not, whether you have come to accept that or not. It is like art is an instinct that we have and need at a fundamental basis. There's even neuroscience behind that, where the way that we respond to art is different in a physiological way than responses to much other things, and we have an embodied response to artistic portrayals. And for me, I was setting up my desk today to record this podcast, and I'd hosted a party last weekend on the Eleusinian Mysteries where we had different paths. And by the way, this is why this was downstairs, is because that was like the final thing on the mind path, was to learn the unity of, to see the revolution of cosmos and to find the unity of being. And it was written on this thing, and it was like a treasure hunt that people had to, it was like an anagogic quest that their souls had to ascend to. And so I have all these like set up candles and things, and I was like, well, I'm just going to put these on my desk and light a few for this podcast. And as I did that, I'm sitting here after, and I've created this desk that is more like a shrine, more like a prayer table. And I just thought, wow, like this is so much more alluring. This has so much more potent potential that I can see, that I can tactilely like taste and experience, compared to if I just had like a working desk with papers and a laptop screen. Like that is not set up to afford profound insight, but like candles and sacred scrolls and like vines and art, that is set up for some sacred work. And so there's this real transjective space that affords greater enhancement of our psyche, greater penetration of insights when we revere these objects and we hold them sacred and when we invest in them to make them art.
That was a beautiful, what do you want to call it? An amble, an exordium, whatever it was.
That was a side quest.
Yeah, no, side quest squared, and we're on to cube, man, to the power of 4 now. But I second that wholeheartedly. The importance of art, and indescribably sometimes, and also unrejectably so. Like it's going to affect you even if you don't want to. The way that art just seeps into your cognition. There's good science behind this as well, about how there's a particular grouping together and a holding of how memory and anticipation, as two different faculties of your brain, come together only in moments of what we were speaking before as the punctual present, only when the composition is presented to you and you're experiencing, say, only 1/500th of the entire composition right now, right here, right now. The way that the past and the future meld together is going to change you irrevocably in the way that it's held together, because how you relate to that holding, to that grouping, is what constitutes your sense of self and esteem and identity. So there's all kinds of things that we like to perhaps venerate because of their ineluctability, but they need not be so. There's good grounded science behind a lot of this. And I also agree about just the potency of the sacred and how so much of it is invoked in simply setting the scene, setting the mood. And what does it mean to set the mood when you're when you're embarking on an activity? It simply means to align. It simply means that it simply means magnetic attraction rather than repulsion. It just means two poles that are cut from the same cloth. That's it, right? And it's not even like asking for much or doing much, but one word that we often, I don't know if we use it interchangeably, but we often group it in our mind associatively with the sacred, is the multivalent. But we can also stretch that out to go all the way to say inexhaustible. The sacred is true inexhaustibility, and that is to be found perhaps only through alignment. All of this kind of, and even your Catholic heritage, and I don't use the word ideology as a pejorative. I use it more as a graspable set of psychotechnologies. But I think that maybe I'm being overly logical and dry here, but I almost feel like the reason that we happen to have revered the one, and I'll also get into the zero, which is equally a big character in the way we understand the one and understand it through contrast and by its absence and the absence of everything and anything. But maybe that's just because of the way that we have literacy, the way that we meditate or don't meditate. Why is it that when something augments at a point that gives us satisfaction, that gives us resolution, rather than what if it just didn't augment? What if it went outwards rhizomatically? Not even rhizomatically, that's the wrong word. But if it just remained irresolved, and 63 or 623 was the number at which we attained most satisfaction. that's a very conceivable reality, but not one that stokes gears. So we can possibly leave it at that.
I guess you're asking the question of, does the intelligibility of the mind in some ways reflect the intelligibility of being? Like, is there that correspondence deeply between the human psychic construct and the ontic, the ontological, the real reality that
I think
is?
something for once in my life, I'm actually not questioning that. I think that there is a deep correspondence, and I'm like happy to give it its
Well,
flat. But what I am trying to get at is
you
the reason.
actually can't argue that it's not. Like, again, like an Aristotelian move is to kind of say that the logic that you use to make an argument is presupposing the argument it's trying to construct. So to say, like, to make a case that words cannot have meaning because XYZ, because they is to presuppose that you can communicate meaning in words. And so it's a similar way when we're thinking about intelligibility and when we're doing science. The greatest presupposition of science is that knowledge is real and that what we say and think about things does reflect reality. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible, to quote Albert Einstein. That's the great forgotten presupposition that science rests upon. It's a metaphysical statement.
Absolutely. And we use truth to our disposal however we want there. We say knowledge is real and knowledge is good. The truth will set you free. And if you don't believe that as a scientist, you're not doing science at all. So yeah, no, I'm not questioning that.
And if you don't believe that as a Christian, then you're not a Christian at all. And like there's so many things where, okay, like, I could almost say that, did Jesus actually rise from the dead? I would almost want to say that I can be a Christian and say that it doesn't matter if he rose from the dead or not. Like, my values and my orientation is to here and now for the transcendental good of bringing, heaven to here and now. It's not reserved for some moral status it gives me when I pass. Like, and Jesus rising from the dead does not factor into my ethics of the here and now. So there's some things which, are up for grabs in Christianity, and almost like that line of traditional belief is not. But I think what I just said about, we actually believe in the truth will set you free. That is the Christ that we believe in. That is, that's one thing that you can't deviate from and still be a Christian.
And evidence of that, I think, is plain to see in sight for the last 2,000 years. The reason Christianity is undestroyable in a strange way. I actually said a few episodes ago, Christianity on steroids is what we're living in the zeitgeist today, is because, and I quote Tom Holland, not the actor who plays Spider-Man, but the cultural and social commentator and critic, who says that the reason Christianity will always live on is because our Lord knows his way out of the grave. It doesn't matter that he dies because... Yeah, right.
Right. Because
Cool.
when truth is invented and truth is actually transcendental, then you have something that isn't going away. It's here to stay. It is the thing. That's when you found the ground, right? When you found the ground of being like, so to get to something like truth, that's clicking for me now. And the way that Tom Holland puts it poetically is also making sense. And I've been discussing truth as something that's invented by or something that has a strong origin in Christianity, and like that's what Zizek's whole point is around Christian atheism, which Christianity invents truth and then atheism uses truth to subvert Christianity. And he's saying, hey, like literally Christianity invented truth and you're now trying to attack it with truth, but like Christianity was always condemned to its own sword, right? One of Jesus's disciples handing him in. Christianity has within its story that it crucifies itself, and then it rises again and brings to life. And so you have that transformative myth playing
clearly
out.
Why Hegel resonated with parts of Christianity till his death. You see the self-negating nature. Also, it's not too far to say that Christianity, quote unquote, invented truth, because most ancient religions weren't so ardent, weren't so hell-bent on truth in the way that we can see in Christianity.
It invented truth in the moment that Pontius Pilate says, what is truth? Like the first postmodernist, what is truth? Like it's almost that's the point where it enters the psyche and where it becomes actualized, when actually the philosophical question is what is, right? Like the whole dialogues are around, philosophy is around the virtue of asking what is justice, what is truth, what is being.
The question is what ought.
Well, and truth is what ought. Like I'd say that truth is a more fundamental question to ought, but anyway,
That's because you're Christian. And what I
Right.
would say is that's why we can safely deride till the cows come home cultural critics that dress up and think they're smart, because we've already had you. We already had the scribes. We already had the Pharisees. You're playing a role. Like you're not doing anything here. This is all presaged 2,000 years ago. You're not doing anything. You're not coming up with anything. There's a reason you guys are called deconstructionists and not constructionists.
Yeah, if
So
only
the next factor that
deconstructionism.
Aristotle talks about is being a whole.
No, what do you know? I'm not finished. Because there's also the other entry of truth, which is from Christ saying, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one gets to the Father except through me." And like that's that is one of, again, the potent things that Christ says that like sticks to our psyche. There's a way in which words can also be sacred and have that stickiness, just as the way of a cup versus a gold chalice, there's a difference. And I think when you speak in ordinary didactic English, you're speaking like a cup, but when you're speaking as Christ in parable, that's your golden chalice. And so there's like a poetic difference in words, and that poetic difference is dependent on how much intelligibility it lends and affords you by hearing it. Yeah, it's when the vibrations become vibes and you go, like it's that's the neurological mapping of meaning. The motor output is to purse the lips and to go, that's when you're in contact with meaning. To go back to some of Jordan Peterson's heritage and his scientific exposition on the phenomena of meaning, which is where honestly his best work is, rather than anything else that we've seen and heard from him in the last 10 years. It's the maps of meaning is his best work.
Yeah, and to go back to your little remark about the only way to the Heavenly Father is through me, there was a serious subversion and a serious inversion of Christian sentiment and values Nietzsche talks about all the time. And I'm reading here from Antichrist. He talks about Jesus' death being misunderstood by his disciples. It got treated as an example offered, a proof of freedom from and superiority to every feeling of resentment or ressentiment. Yeah, all of a sudden, Christians became the ones looking for a culprit for the death of our Lord, which is the most unchristian thing of all time. And everything becomes necessary. And he writes as a quote here, "The love of a disciple excludes all chance." So Jesus becomes the image of revolt against the established order, which is the strangest inversion of conscience and sentiment ever. Yeah, so when we're speaking about kind of the co-opting of the definition and the conception of truth by modern cultural and social critics, taken from the hands of original conscientious and the sentiment of Christianity lying right at the base, something that goes hand in hand with the subversion of the meaning of truth is the image of revolt that Nietzsche talks about in the Antichrist. And basically the spirit of revenge washes over us. And what is the spirit of revenge, if not what we spoke about in earlier episodes, being the will to exactitude? This happened upon me, I will now happen upon it. And that's also another apprehension of the Christian sentiment. So I was just talking about how truth is not the only thing that has been hijacked. It's also our limbic system, in a sense.
Yeah, and I was almost hearing like Nietzsche's analysis of the will to revenge as the spirit of truth for many people, where it's like, actually we need a scapegoat to have justice and truth and to bring order and sanity back, because we're not happy, because we have ressentiment. There's something that's wrong, and it's not us, it couldn't be us, it's them, right? And it's that creation of a scapegoat, which that's why the scapegoat is a sacred thing. Who's the philosopher that, honestly, psychoanalyst who was talking about that?
While you look at that, Yeah, unless you broaden the definition to include all aspects of existentialism somehow into justice, you end up with a really decrepit form of the meaning of justice, and that's not to be conflated with truth. Yeah, that's exactitude. That's very different. That all measures must be calculated for, accounted for, and equal, and that's not what we mean by truth. That's not the truth that will set you free. That's the truth that will imprison you, and has done and continues to do so.
Yeah, the truth will set you free, and the truth being a process where you cast on your deep dark confessions, not only non-essential, like your negatively essential confessions, onto a character and crucify them. Like you are just engaging in what it was Rene Girard who had this theory of the scapegoat mechanism in his, mimetics of social interactions. And it was, a core function of how, for Girard, societies resolved escalating internal conflict was to project that conflict onto a certain group that they could all align around. Yeah, Girard kind of uncovers why the scapegoat is sacred and why we almost need that scapegoat, because while we reverence, like, we'll dress it up and we'll like paint it and we'll do it up in such a big way and then kill it or sacrifice it. I mean, it's because it is the unifier. Like, that is the one thing that we can all agree about, that is the problem, that this is the truth. The truth is that this is the cause of our pain. And so when we are in pain, or when we're in discomfort, or we're faced by challenge, we get into that primitive mindset, not even by that, but just by the way our kind of cognition has evolved to be, is that we are subject to like this innate nature of determining a scapegoat and trying to negate it to give us some peace.
The word scapegoat makes a lot of sense because early primitive cultures obviously sacrificed goats, right? And this is also a fun fact for people that aren't repulsed by this. This is also the psychological genesis of circumcision. The thought became, what if we stopped sacrificing goats, which, put another way, things that we have, and started we up the ante? What if we sacrifice things that we are, things that are most sacred to us? The phallic symbol, of course, is something that pervades throughout all of ancient cultures, and modern cultures as well. Postmodernists and deconstructionists speak a lot about how skyscrapers are our latest instantiation of that, essentially. And so, yeah, this pervades in many ways, not just one.
It was so funny, that article that was written about these big phallic structures, of just like dicks ejaculating, was like buildings, like such a that, like, the deconstructionist perspective of that is like, you're missing the point. Like, we're not just asserting masculinity. Like, it does have that element of like rich masculine symbolism, but it's something that is religious, that we revere. It's not something that is like to be condemned. And so how we got to talking about this scapegoat mechanism, to kind of bring us back to that strain of thought, was how that within that Christian notion of truth, you have an account of the subversive and the scapegoat of, right? Christ was the scapegoat for people, in some sense, not in the same kind of big way. He was more like the sacrificial lamb rather than the scapegoat. He was just kind of seen as a big time criminal to the Pharisees, but a small time criminal to Pilate. But we looked at the ways that truth functions. There's different ways to see truth functioning. And I think what Christianity does, in a quote like, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no one gets to the Father except through me," is that it's giving us this mode of truth, which is an embodied, active thing. It's not something which is like, for Aristotle, the correspondence theory of truth, which is, states in the mind and representations fit in accordance with the states of nature. And when there's, that correspondence between my own mental portrayal and the real world happening, then you have truth. But Christianity wants to say truth is an embodied activity. Truth is something that we live by and enact. And I guess, yeah, science has kind of accepted that definition, and just to go, back to something like Aristotle and say, no, truth is truth is what is. And when we can say or state what is, then we're in relation to truth. And so when we can say or state that something like the Christian events didn't happen and that the divine isn't what it is set out to be, because of these logical reasons and facts. Like, I remember I was having a conversation with a friend who's a good friend, and it was over the space of like 2 years where I was kind of regularly talking to him. I was living with him, and he made, he was kind of more of an atheist and took that rational approach to things, and just found that was the self-evident case. And there was one point where we were picking up on a conversation like a year later where there'd been a lot of time apart, and we were kind of returning to this, and I heard like the same sort of arguments that he would make, and I kind of had this moment where I was like, it's not that I like disagree with it, but it's just not even cool anymore to have that position. And just the way that the movement of new atheism has been and gone is kind of reminiscent of how what is most substantial and true about this whole Christian thing is the Christian sentiment, and the way that it gives you an embodied character and approach to life and orientation to ethics. Again, what we said about how philosophy needing values because it needs to give you some kind of correspondence towards what to do and how to act, so that your kids and your kids' kids can pick it up and live it in a way. Philosophy needs to be lived. This was Kierkegaard's criticism of Hegel, which is a little bit of a tangent, but it's more of a real world historical example of how Kierkegaard, being an existentialist Christian, criticized Hegel for creating a system and then sitting down beside it, not being able to live and teach and advocate, not being able to evangelize his system. And so, I mean, I'm an evangelist of the Hegelian system, so I would kind of disagree with Kierkegaard in that, but there's something to be said about it that, and I think this is our orientation. We want Aristotle's philosophy to be action-oriented. We want it to be active for us.
I think I know this, the friend you're speaking of, and I think I had a conversation with him and on this exact topic in a different angle and different light, and it was really remarkable, his opinion and how it changed from a year on the same topic. And the second one was more intriguing. He said when a third person was in the room, his answer was different, as it should be, because context is king, right? And this person was a staunch atheist, the kind you see more mainstream, I would say less well fleshed out in their own thoughts. This person asked this friend that I think we're talking about the same guy, but yeah, so do you believe in...
I'll say we are.
Yeah, for the sake of cogency for our subscribers. Yeah, we're talking about the same guy. And anyway, so yeah, do you believe in Jesus? And the friend said, I believe Jesus exists and is truer than any of the three of us in this room. And this is the same guy that I think also is an atheist. And he was pointing to the undeniability of meta truths and patterns that launch patterns. And he was saying Christ, and not just Christ, but the patterns that interplay to form the imitation of Christ as a pathway to the Heavenly Father is truer than any of the people in this room. And so I guess if you want to call that belief, then I believe in Christ. And I was sitting there and applauding.
For me, in this story and in this moment, I want to draw attention to that fact of, was it the same friend or not? Because that's the same question as, did Christ really rise from the dead or not? And I'm going to show you why it doesn't matter. Because yes, for this story, no, because the meta truth that underlies it was the same, right? We're talking about the same gist. There was the same deep correspondence beyond the facts that we're in. We were talking about a pattern that goes, that extends out beyond, okay, this specific person or example, and gives us like the myth, or that we see insight into the transformation of that person's journey and movement. And like, I know who you're talking about now from the story, and it's not the same person, but it, for all intents and purposes, is the same. yeah, like the meta trend there is what's important and what's worth paying attention to, and having that coherency between, like, not worrying about if it's the same person or not does not have any import on like what we both said.
And what does this lend towards what is truth telling versus what is lie telling? Nothing. We're not lying when we say it, for all intents and purposes, it was the same friend.
We're literally not lying. When that's the thing, and that's why truth telling is like so much more than statement of facts or correspondence with reality. Sorry, Aristotle. That's why truth telling is exactly like seeing into being, and seeing into being in a way where you're, seeing into the affordances of being, right? Seeing into the relations therein to see like how, it's more in that space.
Yeah, and just a final point on this little giant, tirade we've been on. This also speaks a lot to proper alignment and attunement in terms of relationship to scripture, and how we take scripture as truth, and what type of truth to take out of scripture, because it's clearly the answer is not zero, and parts of scriptures, certain patterns and configurations are truer than your sorry ass will ever be, so what's going on there, and how do you attune to that so that your ass starts being a little less sorry? And and the answer to that is probably something to do with understanding the genealogical context of some of these scriptures. I said a long piece about how truth comes to be in the Foucaultian sense, and how he traces its lineages back, and its worth, value, and esteem, and how that necessarily changes over the course of centuries. And it changes. It doesn't diminish. It doesn't accentuate or better. It just changes. That's it. And scripture at time immemorial, because we kind of think, okay, and then there was Christianity after we had the commandments or the gospels or whatever. There was a time immemorial, and since we're speaking so much about 00 source code and stuff, this kind of lends itself perfectly into this discussion. God gave it, the fathers lived it, now we have to try and live like the fathers lived it. Yes, this is also semi-Nietzschean. The origin of something as holy and reverential as that being nothing more than the experimentation of many people across a long time. And the scripture itself is the grand conclusion. It's the apotheosis of trials and tribulations. It itself does not create, which is, again, a bit of a misunderstanding and misappropriating on our end to think that the scripture will birth the reality. That's the like culmination of great patterns, and if you can attune yourself to those patterns, then you're like, this is very you can like rise in the planes of consciousnesses, and not in the sense of like you're in the material, you're going to go in the astral, and then after that you have the celestial. No, not like that. In the sense of lokas, worlds and states, right?
What you were saying there was almost like, that's what Plotinus says. Like, he does it in a more deductive, I guess, and philosophically rigorous approach, but like the ascendancy from the one to the many and back to the one. But yeah, when we want to, when we are confessing the non-essential in that by saying, oh, and there's this astral realm that's connected in this way, and you have these like this, this one small effect in science is actually like an unlock to truth, and try and like construct this ontology and woo I'm allergic to that kind of stuff.
There's a strong reason why there's a tri-directionality between the narrative and the nomological, and what's the third one? God, normative. And what is the tie-in? What is the way that you actually deduce from something that is in its form narrative? Like, how do you get nomos? How do you get nomology out of that? There is no explicit way you don't get an instruction manual as to how that happens, but that's also because you're not supposed to make that happen. Like, it'll happen, and you'll either pick up that pattern or you won't. And something like the Bible is nothing more than a codification of a way to live a good life. And that's it's a way, it's a better Nicomachean ethics. It's like if Aristotle was actually smart, he would have written the Bible, but that's not possible, because it's there are parts of it that a human being couldn't have possibly.
No. Yeah. But it's not possible. Yeah, exactly. I was like, wait, I'm following. Wait, no, he couldn't have done that. And yeah, because and not because I'm like hold some reverence for it and I want to defend like the status of to say someone just couldn't ascend and write. Like I think you could ascend and write the Bible, but you would. It's not through like being smarter to do it. Like it's by being more of a truth teller to write
Well,
the Bible.
or taking a higher dose, right? The sacred mushroom and the cross. Like, I don't think a normal human being could write the Bible.
If Aristotle returned to the Lucinian mysteries and took more Kikion in his drink in the Telesterion, then maybe he would have written the Bible. But no, we got the metaphysics.
Well, I'm speaking from the depths of the luscious jungles that arise from Bali, and if he just came to the right cacao ceremony, he perhaps also could.
Exactly. I think part of the cure then is to read scripture, get on that ass, and get your sorry ass into gear.
Right, and it's a sorry ass because it's you. Because when we talked about Christ writing that ass, it wasn't a sorry ass. It was a very like magnificent ass, but that's because it was Christ writing it. When it's you, it's
it was
sorry.
an esteemed ass.
Thick.
Yeah. The illustrious Thick Lizzie. I think oh god. I have a pretty shitty next point to make. But
yeah. Do that and then we'll transition back.
Yeah, this is our transition back. That's why it's a bit shit. No, like how a unity is that which aligns us, and it's to the point of unities is something instinctive, something that brings us back to like very much the here and now. And for me, like this chapter is a bit of a reflection, a bit of a meditation, and a bit of a contemplation on the unities that show up in our lives and the unities that show up in apprehension itself and in intelligibility. When we're apprehending something, what are the necessary factors to see something as a unity? That's what this whole chapter is on for Aristotle. And for me, I just had like a basic example, and it was when you were talking about like we need unity to do things, to act, and to I guess it's a little bit of a trivial point, but there was a context that it married to really well in what you were saying about 30 minutes ago. But just the example of when we get into a group discussion, and when we're like having a meeting, and at the start of your day in your trade, if you're in a little team, and you have your foreman giving you a briefing, or when you're at work and you're entering a meeting and someone's leading the meeting, there has to be a kind of a briefing at the start, like a why are we here? And that's an alignment, and we are aligning at the start of a meeting so that we are all brought into a unity, such that then we can go out and do our own unique roles. Gosh, it's like the religion of a group is a group functions by having a religion. The religion, that micro religion of that moment, is the alignment that we have about, okay, this is our task today. This is what we're doing. This is our health and safety debrief. And it's to have an alignment so that the activity that can follow and the truth that can be enacted is true, that it's true to your purpose, true to your alignment for the group. So there's like a little reflection on the way that unity has like a religious import to any group, and that surfaces in very micro ways. That's why it's a potent archetype, because it is reflected and refracted in so many different moments.
That was a smoother transition than I thought it would be. I thought it would be clunkier than that. But yeah, well, the second point Aristotle makes, just as a recap, the first point he makes as to the different multitude of ways of being one, the quality of oneness manifests through, firstly, continuity, that is the naturally continuous. So human beings persist until they die, so human beings are continuous. The second quality would be being a whole. There is clearly a point where if you point to the corner of the room, I'm not there, and so I am somewhere else, and I am a whole unto myself. It's not the same as I exist here and not there. It's what he's getting, or truer to what he's saying would be that I'm not a partial. Like when you say Luca, there is a fullness to that, in the sense, in the way that we can apprehend. Further civilizations may have anthropomorphic beings, or rather, what's the word? anthropological beings who have 5 limbs and not 4. But for now, I have 4 limbs, and that's our conception of wholeness for a human being. So I guess this doesn't say much for handicapped people, but this is the point of Aristotle's philosophy, is like fringe cases need not matter, because clearly there are contexts where a human being is not a whole. Actually, this is really potent. So I don't know what he's up to here. But before you say anything, my good man, the third point is that you also have to be a specific unity. Yeah, and that's pretty self-explanatory. And then he also says being a numerical unity. So yeah, and just as a bit of a summation of all this, he says that what binds all of this together, what ultimately is the essence of unity, is the quality of indivisibility. And I think that's what we've been ascending to slowly, slowly, slowly. What is it that gives us the manifestation of unification? And turns out that is the quality of being indivisible. And isn't that tangential to, at the very least, individuation, right? So that's that. I found that to be a real
Ooh,
yeah, that was my reaction, right? I was thinking, wow, so the maps we have of psychological and philosophical progress and development on a human pathway seem to mirror really closely his ascent. And this is what I was going to say. It's not an ascent to the core. Like it's not an ascent, nor is it a descent. It's a journey to the center of the earth. And he's gotten past the magma and the whatever. He's gotten past the various earthly layers to get to the center of something. And what he's left with is whatever he can see. But what makes that thing a thing is the fact that it couldn't be otherwise for the fact of its indivisibility. So any thoughts on that?
Any thoughts? I really like how you went deeper and deeper into Aristotle, only but to find Jung connected really well to it. And how, if you think about Aristotle, one of his, as you said, senses of unity, he's almost talking about it, when he's saying senses, he's not, giving the 10 commandments and being, here's the law that we never knew. He's like deducting it. He's not doing that, but that's exactly what he's doing. No, I take that back. He's exactly putting down the 10 commandments, basically. But the difference is they're not commandments of action. They're not commandments. They're the 10 accounts of being. And the 10 accounts would be like 1, substance; 2, potential and actuality; 3, unity. And he kind of gives us these whole accounts. Their accounts are not commandments because they don't instruct us on how to act. They just give the account of what is in being. And I think for the way that he's writing this and the similarity that he does have to Moses is that he's observing and going out and researching and surveying the field and then collecting his thoughts and spending time with it to then create the written word, essentially. Moses is a judge for, I think, just decades when the Jews are in the desert wilderness wandering, looking for a god, creating false idols. Moses is the judge of all of these micro interactions that are having, all of these behavioral moments where he's kind of telling them, he's almost the priest for that group. He's telling them what will happen. He's telling them of the circumstance. He's like giving the account of God. And so in that way, he's really internalizing all of these meta patterns that are being enacted. And then he's transcribing these meta patterns into the patterns themselves, rather than like giving the exact example of that discrete particular event. He's going, okay, what's the universal that describes this? How can I ascend my intelligibility to have more breadth and depth so that I can give a better account of this and like give people the law? And that's what Aristotle is doing here too. He's observing and talking with his students and engaging in that process of back and forth in his life and in his context, as we've learned from the start of this series, that puts him in a place to then now say it. Here are the ways that we think about this. Here are all the things that hold true. Like, these are the things that most people wouldn't disagree with me on. That's his epistemology in some sense. It's like what is shared and agreed with intrapsychically between people. So there's like a powerful method in that, and it's actually the way that we have created our scientific understanding of personality today, right? To understand who we are, is to, like, one of the most common ways in the Big Five model is to look at the different descriptive words that we place to other people, and like do this big meta-analysis to map out the patterns of all the words that we use to describe people, and then that's how you just get the kind of the Big Five model. Yeah, there's a similarity between Aristotle and Moses, which is particularly interesting, and it works in a number of ways, but it deviates in a very interesting way. And I think it deviates in exactly the way that I've been wanting to hear from Aristotle from the start. But he is not my chief, he is only my priest. He will not command me and tell me where to go, what to do, to fight which battle. He will just tell me what the fuck things are.
He's closer to a seamstress or a handmaiden, you could even say. I particularly liked what you said about the meeting where someone's debriefing you at the start and almost giving you the grounds of what's to come, and yeah, priming you and being and feeling primed as a basis of unity because of the alignment that it affords a group and brings.
And that's the masculine principle. Like, that's the skyscrapers. It gives you a unity and an alignment, and goddamn do we need that. Like, we absolutely need skyscrapers to stand structurally intact, not only because that serves a practical purpose, more than that, because it serves that psychic purpose of having a unity. Like, that's why the Christ at the center of a church is a crucifix at the center of church is super important. That's why, like, the obelisk statue on top of a hill is super important. It offers that alignment and center. And that's why it's also pointing up to the sky, because it's transcendent of the earthly. Like, that's why we build up and tall, because it transcends the horizontal, because it is a unifier, because that unifier is beyond where we are. It is a portal to the transcendental because of its unity, because it has a transcendental unity. And that brings me to the question of, what is the nature of the transcendental unity in being? Which is like what Aristotle is asking and what we are answering in some way, but just to bring that and presence that explicitly, directly, because I think that's kind of, for Aristotle, the juice of his question. And when we get to, Neoplatonism, what they're really asking is, the unity of being. And I think, like, I also want to give another lens, and to kind of deepen a bit more into that example of, the alignment at the start of a meeting. It's also just alignment in purpose and in action. A lot of people are, like, very grateful when you just step up and take charge and are, putting yourself out there to say, hey, this is where we should go. There's even an example where I was in a group of 4 walking, and I'm kind of the most junior person at this company, but we were walking to have lunch, and we had a place to go to, but no one knew exactly how to walk there. So I just searched up the directions on my phone, and I was like, all right, guys, like, follow me, like, I'll take us there. And someone was like, man, thanks for doing that. I really love it when someone takes charge. And it's a girl had said that it's something where, regardless of gender and regardless of this unifying principle maybe having a more masculine affect to it, it's something that's deeply appreciated and needed regardless of gender. And so I just wanted to kind of naturalize that and show how, even at that kind of just deep empathic level of understanding one another, that it is a virtue to have that unity.
Yes, and can only be, or only is realized in certain states and in certain situations. And yeah, good on you, man. Good on you with that. I think you showed your unity, or you birthed the right unity as a result of your emotive disposition and the charge.
When that happened as well, I was like, she really just, like, stroked my feathers a little bit. Like, I will take charge. Like, I'll do them.
And isn't that telling that you can only take charge when you are allowed to?
Yes, when you're given permission. Yes,
but
exactly.
What I was going to say again about the alignment and attunement thing and the context of the group meeting, because I really like that you said inter psychically, but yeah, it's inter and intra psychically, all for one for all together, right? And yeah, I was even reminded of Hegel's understanding. He says perception is a gathering of sense certainties into a coherent whole. it's not a whole made up of perception isn't a whole made up of parts. And you almost inadvertently answered the question from a few episodes ago of what makes something more than the sum of its parts. How is it even possible that something could, because we were also speaking about the transcendental unity, the short answer for what makes something more than the sum of its parts is the transcendental unity, that which binds from up above or from down below or simultaneously. But it's actually just us that are breaking things into parts and making them divisible, which isn't to say that like all things left alone in their true, unperturbed, untouched state are undivided. But it's also not saying that. So I don't really know.
I wanna bring in the characterological development of unity. I think this is original as well. When last time we got to original play, this just seems, I've never heard this before. So to set this up, you're talking about the unity of our cognition, right? The synthetic cognitive unity that is a subject, that is subjectivity. Us as a subject, to what you're saying, is a synthetic cognitive unity is like some of the philosophical jargon that someone like Hegel would place on it. And it is from Kant coming to say, hey, when we look at our subjective position, when we look at our Dasein, we do find, rules and principles that govern our perception, to say that when we look out into the world of nature, are we seeing unity intrinsic to nature itself, or are we seeing unity as filtered through our sense apparatus? And there's an interesting question there, and Kant definitely thought,
if you reduce what's in nature to unity, then also Hegel would say perception is being reduced to properties, right? Which is the opposite of existing relationally.
If you reduce nature to unity, it's like it's a big statement, but because nothing more to say on that. But what I want to bring in here, and we can then continue to circle around it, is how, again, going back to William James, like, I'm once again just happy and glad that old William is back in the mix. He has this really great point on that almost disunity of being in its natural state. Like, nature is naturally disunified, but then it's not, right? Because how could it be? We're not pure subjects. Like, we look into the world and we can see something that resembles the objective, and we look away and we perceive it again, and it's there again. So there's a real unity to nature. There are real unities there, but it takes time for us to see them. And so I'm wondering if there's unities in nature that takes time to see them. I'm wondering if there's unities to just being as such, the one that takes time to see it, but that when we do learn and grow and sensitize to it, that we do actually see the reality of it. The quote from William James: "The baby, assailed by eyes, ears, nose, skin, and entrails at once, feels it all as one great blooming, buzzing confusion." The blooming, buzzing confusion of life that a newborn infant experiences is super intense, super psychedelic, and like psychedelia, meaning mind revealing. It's showing so much of like almost the primitive state, the natural primordial unity of a child. And then when you look at it as it grows up and sensitizes itself to the unity of things, then it gets to be able to point to something, right? And that's that next stage of development where the child can point to something. And if you, I remember like Jordan Peterson brought this up, and this is why like Jordan Peterson has like features that are savable. I mean, of course, but even to the person that hates him the most, like his love for kind of children and like that traditional family values, I think is, redeemable about him, in the same way that Homer Simpson has redeemable qualities about loving his family, But he kind of expounds on this idea of when a child can first see and point to something, it's actually zeroing in on one thing. Like, the child can't yet zero out and like take stock of this whole thing, but it first learns to zero in to one thing, anything. It might be the mother, it might be the cat, something that catches its attention. And that act of pointing is to reduce this blooming, buzzing confusion into one unity and call that out. And so when the child points at something, that's a celebration, because it's learning this concept of unity.
Yeah, I think a lot was evoked from me there. But the first question I'd have is, are you saying that as being a positive thing? Like, would it, yeah, is it celebratory that the child is he rising or reducing to unity there?
Yeah, I think it is, when you look at it, when you zoom out, like when you zero out, that's when you see it all as a journey, right? And you're only capable of that zeroing out when you can be in contact with the Jungian self, when you've individuated enough to be your own unity. So first, you're not a unity and you're seeing the world, and that's not a unity.
Yeah.
Gradually, the zeroing in enables you to see a unity of nature. Then as you progress, you get to zero out and see yourself as a unity, and get to observe yourself and have a self-reflective consciousness, have a cognizing subject. And then at that point, you can start to make the reflection that, yes, I actually lost a lot by seeing the unity of the world and by becoming a unity myself, because then you can get just structured and ossified and, stuck in this rigid mode of thinking, and you can think that religion is all about Christ rising from the dead. That's when you're in a unity that has been unhelpfully constrictive on your creative source. And so what I want to say is that the answer to that such a question is not A or B, it's AB. And we get to that AB when we're able to zero out rather than zero in. And yeah, there's a lot here, but I think it is, again, it's then that rediscovering the disunity of nature and rediscovering the disunity of the self. But you can do that as a sacred discovery, as a sacred act of rediscovering where you were at the start and knowing it for the first time.
I don't know why, and this confuses me as well, but I feel like a natural irk and an aversion against, or toward rather, this self-development pathway, kind of the Jungian thing of, I think he maps this out in one, maybe in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, about how some things are only unlocked to you in the second stage of your life. When the sun is setting, only do they become accessible. And on the topic of unity, I just feel this strong, like, internal pull towards, why can't there be unity in every stage, on every day, in every life, of every life rather? And so, yes,
that's the pre-trans fallacy.
Sorry?
Isn't that the pre-trans fallacy?
Yeah, I guess that would be one way of chopping it up. But yeah, even that, right? Like, but isn't there a third stage of the pre-trans fallacy in the first stage? And I guess, yeah, sure, you could cheaply kind of just be like, yeah, well, there is, otherwise there wouldn't be a second and third to come. But so much of this has to do with the tabular.
I'm really following you here, but why is that cheap?
Well,
sorry.
Because it feels like a bifurcation, right? Or a trifurcation in that case. Of something that need not be split.
The Trifurcation of Nature. That's a book that needs to be written. God damn. I'm not even kidding. I'm going to write that book. No one's going to write it. I'm going to write it.
I was just thinking about, like, the whole nature, nurture, blank slate, tabula rasa thing of babies, right? Is the soul a blank state? Well, it depends, because as we've discovered and uncovered through Aristotle, we are fields of potentials, and these potentials aren't actuals waiting to happen. They're actuals waiting to happen. They aren't non-actuals. So, like, when you say, like, is a child a blank slate? Like, that's not even possible. What does that even mean? Like, because if something is to come, then it's not a blank slate, because something is to come. But then you also have stupid questions, and, like, this kind of even takes you into calculus of, like, what I was saying before, like, a zero number, but also, is an empty plate a plate of food? Like, I don't know. Probably, if there's gonna be one in 10 minutes, then is it already a plate of food? Yeah. But it kind of harkens to this idea. Sorry, I'll just finish here. But just this idea that experience is not simply an etching onto a once blank soul, but more, you used the term refraction before, but a changing of the light, the angles of the page that we call the soul. So kind of what we were also hearkening to before, the infinity closing down to one, only to open back up to infinity ad infinitum.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Thanks so much for watching, folks. We'll end right here.
Okay. Well, what I kind of want to respond to that with is like Hegel takes us very deeply to the whole dialectics of the dialectical synthesis isn't a like not in you cannot read in Hegel, and this is now like a point that I'm hoping people understand, that you don't think of him as someone who has a thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis, and it's like this A to B to C sequence where C is then a synthesis that's higher than the parts before it. Like Hegel's dialectic is, as you say, like prefigured in the beginning, that the ending is always prefigured in the beginning, that the actual is always present in the potential, to use Aristotelian language. But Hegel would say that, yeah, to use this language of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, the synthesis is something that was contained within the thesis to begin with. And so that's why it's a one step forward, one negative step back. And that is still progress, because we are synthesizing using the start. And that's why like the concept of sublation becomes a thing, because it's not taking from one point to another, then to next. It is returning to that former and making it a greater whole by expanding its own lack within it. And that is how it evolves and becomes from like being to essence to concept to idea. Like that is the process of dialectic. It's the what over one. Like it's the negative, it's the 2 to the power of 1 sign, where okay, 1 to the power of 1 is 1, 2 to the power, no, yeah, 1 to the power of 1 is 1, but then yeah, anything to the power of 0 is 1. It's like that weird thing where there's a law and we don't really make sense of it, but it just has to be that way.
Yeah. Even like when you divide something by 0 and your calculator's brain just fries, right? You think,
Right.
what? What affixes rather gracefully onto this is Poe staring at the dragon scroll versus Tai Lung staring at the dragon scroll. There's a reason Tai Lung freaks out and Poe doesn't when they see the same exact thing, right? Tai Lung is hurriedly scratching through it, rummaging, being like, wait, where is it? Where is the answer? And Poe also, he just stares at himself. I sent you this meme the other day, but he just like he also is pretty clueless, and that's actually why upcoming video.
That's his gift. That's his gift. Yeah.
Yeah.
His meekness is his great strength. It's not his weakness, right? The fact that he's a panda is that meekness is his great triumph. And I mean,
and that meekness does inherit the earth, because he does annihilate Tai Lung by sitting on him, right? And that's why she's interesting. I can't train you like I train the others. I have to train you like I can train you.
And that's the whole, that part there is the whole story of how you train someone in their essence rather than trying to fit them to a mold. And so how to raise your children, how to interact with peers, how to give agapic love is to deeply appreciate the other person and deeply see their perspective, and then seek, like, to give advice. We had a like workshop at work on feedback and advice, and to give proper advice is not about yourself. Feedback is about yourself. Feedback is, here's how I experience something. But advice is knowing what's best for this person, what their intentions are, what their journey is, and then helping offer a step on the way, and not telling them the next step. It's offering a step.
Yes. I cannot train you like I train the others. And so Poe's dying to eat dumplings at the beginning of the training scenes. And then all of a sudden, he does all his push-ups. He masters whatever he has to do. He's gone to the birthplace of Kung Fu and he's doing his fancy Tai Chi type moves. And at the end, a dumpling is thrown his way and he throws it right back. Because post-transformation and information comes conformation. He also, similar to the Furious Five, doesn't want the dumpling. They also don't want it. But the way to eventual culmination into confirmation was different. And so even the blank slate, the seemingly blank slate wasn't a blank slate after all, because there was an it's so cheap again to say this, but there was a soul imprinting, or you could even say a psychic remnant, like what we associate with archetypes. that was already there and waiting and dying to be unearthed.
Kung Fu Panda is the greatest pop cultural synthesis of Western and Eastern religious tradition. Like, it is at that status and level unequivocally. And it was intentionally made so the director put and the investment behind it put all this money into it because they wanted to do something so good, because they had such a great idea. And it's one of the greatest movies of all time. And it appeals to everyone, which is what makes it even greater. It's not some R18 thing that kids can't see and understand and love. It also speaks to the children. So, yeah.
I love that movie so much that I seek to obliterate it in an upcoming video. And I talk about how Tai Lung was the true hero, and not so unsung in my eyes. And so stay tuned for that, folks, if you're interested about how Po was actually the villain and Tai Lung was the hero.
I think, and I'm very much looking forward to that. I'm still in the Po was the one true hero. He was, again, like we've talked about this motif before of something signaling that you're the hero. He doesn't know his father, as the common trope of, okay, I don't know my destiny, I'm somehow removed from my destiny, just like Harry Potter didn't know his father. Just like every other hero didn't know his father, because they were to rescue their father from a place that was, at the bottom of the ocean, in a whale, in some ways destroyed. And so he's Kung Fu, like, Po is a panda living with a goose and doesn't know that he's not his real father. Like, he learns that, and he's like,
perfect,
shocked.
the trope, right? When you rescue your father, the heavenly father rescues you. Go down into the underworld, and the one from the overworld comes down to equilibrium.
And that's literally what happens. He goes back to his heritage and learns true kung fu and chi that his lineage of pandas knew, and his lineage of pandas were endangered. So he goes back and saves the population, and they also give him the capabilities to defeat, the warrior of that movie who's stealing everyone's chi. And
Yes,
I think why I'm still in the camp of Po being the true hero is partly because if you think about this in like the Lacanian sense of desire versus drive, we, like, Tai Long reached the Dragon Scroll and was, he initially tried to take the Dragon Scroll by force, and I guess that was his drive. So it's also playing around with the fact that he's not just some like big-headed genius scientist who has this infantile infatuation with something. He's a much more strong hero in this movie, and he's got a drive. He wants to be, the best, the ultimate. You can tell us a lot more about what his drive is, but his desire was the Dragon Scroll. That was his downfall. His downfall was the thing that he was seeking, because once he had found it, then, and this is the common thing of what you want and you want and you want what you can't have, and then when you have it, you no longer want it. That's the function of desire. That's the function of fantasy. But drive is something that's like something that's, you're not working out to try and look good or to try and enter a weightlifting contest or to go to a bodybuilding thing. You're working out because of the fucking strength it gives you, and because of the vitality that it courses through your veins, because of the health that you achieve from it. Like, that's the drive. And so although Tai Long has this significant drive, his desire was for the Dragon Skull. His desire is what defeated him, because he had this normative placement of the desire as actually above the drive. So when he, so he's trying to do that. Oogway sees that. Oogway is this master of dialectic and can see the difference between desire and drive in Tai Long, and says, hey, no, and paralyzes Tai Long so that he can't fulfill his desire. So also Oogway was saying, no, like, it's your desire, there's nothing there, and why is it former? This is dangerous. When Tai Long comes to see the Dragon Scroll later, he opens it and it's like nothing. And he's like, what? And Poe's just there, like, with a kind of a smile on his face, like a wink. And yeah, that's when the desire is actualized. And there's nothing true about the desire. There's nothing like substantial about the fantasy. Yes, it's true, but it's ideological. It's not contact with reality. It's phantasmagoric. And so it plateaus, and we see actually Poe has come to reconcile his drive, work with himself as a dumpling loving panda, and through that doesn't need to see he actualizes his drive and not his desire, and like he has to work through his desire because his desire is the freaking dumplings, and he goes, actually, like that's how he discovers his drive, is through his desire, and that's what Tai Long was unable to do. And like that's where I'm coming at it from. So I'm really curious. You have whetted my appetite for what is to come in your video essay.
Yeah, well, maybe you should make a antagonistic video where you just oppose everything I say, like a Alex reacts to Luca. No, that distinction between desire and drive is great, man. I really like it. I also think Oogway, Poe says it himself. Fuck, maybe Oogway was a crazy old turtle after all. I'm more in that camp, and so I'll expand upon that.
Yeah, picking that up, I found that there was it was like similarly the same patterns of what you've been talking about. I think even for this first one, just to demonstrate the point that Aristotle is making, I'll maybe go through and give my kind of reading and examples on each of those so we can cover them. That for the first sense of unity that Aristotle discusses is continuity, and I quote, "There is the continuous, either in general or especially that which is continuous by nature and not by contact, nor by being together. And of these, that has more unity and is prior, whose movement is more indivisible and simpler." And that's recapping what we have discussed and what you had brought up of the unity being more unified if it has less moving parts. Like if it's harder to strip it of its unity, if it's more simple in a sense, then it has a stronger unity, is what Aristotle wants to say. And I think that's why this was the Jungian point of when we go down that path of individuation, when we come to learn who we are, we look at our disunity, we look at our shadow, we come to find a deeper unity that contains that's putting us in contact with the self, which is great. It's like it maps onto that psychic development as well, which is kind of nice when one of the truths that you hold is that correspondence to what is intelligible to what we can see and perceive mentally has correspondence to, or maybe exact analogy to being. I think for this, like, it was partly just to kind of expound upon it, like an example of walking through a forest, going on a path, and then Aristotle would say, it's self-evident that a boardwalk, like a built and constructed boardwalk, is a more unified path than if you're bush bashing towards something. That if you have to like go around these rocks and under a tree and look around for the path, you're in a little bit more of a fragmented state to try and find your destination, rather than the boardwalk, which has a greater unity and is easier to follow. Now, I think that like there's also tremendous value in doing that searching to try and get to something. Like maybe there are certain paths where we don't want there to be a clear and easy unity, because when we think about that trope of it's about the journey, not the destination, if our journey is just a simple unity, then it's not really that exciting. But if what we're looking for is a unity that can only be found in a desperate searching in disunity, then it's a lot more potent in that. Second part is being a whole. And I think for this, and for the second point, I'll begin with a quote that most particularly expounds upon Aristotle's point of one of the senses of unity is it being a whole. WHOLE. That which is a whole has a certain shape and form, is one in a still higher degree, and especially if a thing is of this sort by nature and not by force, like things which are unified by glue or nails or by being tied together, if it has it in itself the cause of its continuity. Right. And so if it holds within itself its own principle of unity, then it's more whole. And I think it's partly like, you could say that if something is, created and held together by a glue stick that you brought from Kmart, it's not very unified, although it might be like standing up and it does resemble a unity if it's like a piece of origami or, a little construction. But if it was like if there was super glue that was used and cement it, then it's more unified. You could knock it over and pick it back up and it wouldn't fragment. And so like, yeah, that principle of unity makes complete sense. But if we push it a little bit further and read a bit more deeper into Aristotle, the last part he says is, if it has in itself the cause of its continuity. I think of like the way that nature is kind of by definition for Aristotle, that which has the cause of its continuity, like that which has its own principle of motion and rest. I think as well, like going back to that example of the cyclone or the tornado, like the tornado doesn't seek out the conditions of its own continuation, so it's less of a unity. Even though it is very unified, it will gradually disassemble and, you know, kind of be scattered across the winds. And so there's less of a unity to that than there is to other objects which can sustain themselves over time.
And that's the
yeah,
key difference here is, right? Like the unity is predicated on what I said in a couple of discussions ago about the quality humans have, which is self-making, which would be higher in this regard than the tornado, which is simply self-organizing. So the glue stick is self-organizing. It's not as dynamic as that, but perhaps it is. And it's but for the lack of technology that we don't realize that all the parts are actually really moving. All the particles are moving in the glue stick. But yeah, the difference in gradation of rank in unification would be something like self-making versus self-organizing principles.
Yep. And that's the example of why Aristotle is good at some levels of perception, but not at others. Like when we go below the unity of perception to the sub-perceptual, that's when Aristotle's principles of unity don't hold in the same way, where, yeah, there is something to each particle object, you know, about its own nature as a physical being and as a molecular and chemical and elemental property. The substance of something, which is still using Aristotelian language, has that kind of principle of motion and rest at the, you know, sub-perceptual level. So all things have that. But to his point and to this field of, you know, you could equally say, okay, but when we go to that level, we're then not in the ethical, we're purely in the speculative or the scientific. And so I would, yeah, almost say that there is still value in seeing us here at this level of the things that our sense perception can perceive as unities and can apprehend.
Totally. And when we talk about how he kind of envisages a lot of criticism to come, I just want to read out a quote from that very same section where he's at his most sly and kind of, yeah, I guess snickering tone. When Protagoras quipped that man is the measure of all things, he had in mind, of course, the knowing or perceiving man. The grounds are that they have perception or knowledge, and that these are said to be the measure of objects. Nonsense on stilts, which is pretty funny. So yeah, like it doesn't say much about the sub-perceptual, but yeah, that's just kind of adding fuel to the fire and beating a dead horse at that stage, eh?
Yep. Yeah, and so for the two final points and what I kind of had come to with my thoughts, and well, just reading of it was, yeah, being a specific unity, Aristotle doesn't give too much more account of this. It's pretty self-obvious for him. And it's because when we're thinking of like, yeah, what is an individual, like a specific unity, and he would give the example of number and say, you know, clearly then like an integer number is indivisible, or when we divide it, it just loses its identity as what it was. So it's, you know, clearly an individual thing. A discrete unit is also a sense of unity. And fourthly, for being a numerical unity, this is particularly interesting and something that perhaps you could say more on. But a quote to pull us into this: in kind, that which in intelligibility and in knowledge is invisible, so that that which causes substances to be one must be one in the primary sense. So I like how he is making that connection between, hey, the subjective stance and the stance of being as well. So it's a very interesting classification in that way, because he's lending us to the idea that oneness can be understood through knowledge, is a kind of unity, and bringing in intelligibility there as well. And so that's where we get that conformity theory, where there's the mind and the world as being in a continuous plane, and unities exist across them. And so he talks about indivisibility there as well, which we might say, like, although many humans exist, like a human is an indivisible thing, and you couldn't like divide that person into two humans, and so like them and their identity is unified and has a unity because they are like an indivisible substance in a sense. Like you couldn't divide a triangle into itself. Like I know you can draw a line through a triangle and then you have more triangles, so there is like that fractal pattern, but you then have two separate triangles that are a different unity to that higher order unity, and that's the indivisibility that he's talking about.
I wanted to ask you just how you felt when you were reading that breakdown in general. Like, I know I kind of felt that I didn't really disagree with anything he said there, but I just, I didn't find it particularly evocative, or like it didn't bring much out of me, you know? Did you have any similar?
I thought, what he said was like, great. He like makes complete sense. Like he's not off kilter when he's saying that. And so nothing, I mean, lots interesting evoked there, but nothing that was like, oh wow, this is like, it's almost you're explaining the self-evident, which is great and like its own good exercise, but not like revealing something new. It's common sense.
Right? Like it was fleshing out of common sense essentially, and so once you flesh that out, it becomes common sense everywhere.
And so what is the uncommon sense was interesting for me. Like what is he not speaking to there? And for me, it was just like a kind of a Hegelian move where I kind of thought, okay, isn't one of the key characteristics of unity as well difference? Isn't that one of the key constituents to know unity, for something to have any substantial ground as a unity? There must be something that it is distinct from. There must be a kind of difference that characterizes it as a unity. So why are we not talking about differences when we talk about our senses of unity? If we can't discernibly tell any difference between something, then don't we see it as a unity? But if we could deepen our perception and actually see more differences, then that would change our perception of something being a unity.
It might have just been covered with one of the other points he made, which was being a specific unity. Like I think when you're a specific unity, that means determinacy first and foremost, right? And so if you are a determinate unity, surely that means that are you distinguishing between determinacy and difference there, would you say?
I think although he might refer to it, he maybe only does so offhandedly and accidentally, and doesn't like address the point well enough for me to feel like he's addressed it. So there'll be a certain way in which he has alluded to it, but he hasn't made it a focal point, which for me, I feel like it needs to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. But nothing he did say, I think, there was tons and a tremendous amount also that was spoken in the silence or in the things left absent, but nothing he said was particularly, I was adversarial to, so that was good.
I think there's one more point, an idea that I want to bring up in this discussion on unity, which kind of may be closer to like one of my final things that I like wanted to capture and say. There's more areas that I'm like happy to discuss, but I think in our following conversations we're going to be able to pick up on these threads and add new Aristotelian fuel to the fire, to the campfire, to these coupling campfires. Point that I want to kind of lay out here is the great unities of being to me are nature, God, and the one. Like we have these three transcendental unities, and they seem distinct enough that you cannot say this is this, and no, that's actually just a reflection of this. Like they are their own distinct, different transcendentals. but they also need some kind of explainability. We have to give some kind of account to them. And I think when you just inquire deeply into the nature of what is, you can only arrive at one of those places. And you can arrive like slightly to the left or slightly this side or a blend of the two of them, but you're ultimately like, these are the three substantial sources that are the fundamental units, the three that I have there. And I think not William James, although maybe, but also potentially Alfred North Whitehead talked about these in a paper. And I had been sitting on this idea of these are like the three transcendental unities for a while, and then I saw this paper or like written on the same thing, and I was like, what the heck? But yeah, in essence, like one is this this God, and God of Abrahamic religions, of religion as such, has this almost personal quality and has this notion of faith, and is this generative creation story entailed. And it's not just like believing in the stories of it, but it's the theology behind it, which gives this unity of God, the attributes and qualities of this that we can learn and know. And I think you could almost map these onto the three categories that Horace Landry wants to give, where if we have nature, God, and the one, you could almost say nature is immanent, God is transcendent, and the one is omniscient, or the transcendence and omniscience around the other way. So there's a deeper dialectical unity that maybe these three categories sit within. The one is like the obsession of the philosophical tradition, in a sense. It's where Plato gets to and what Aristotle arrives at and deepens, and that's kind of where we are in this remit. When we talk about the one, when we talk about unity, it scales up to the good or the one, which doesn't have this, it doesn't tell you what to do, but it puts you in touch with a feeling of sacredness. And then nature, which is obviously that immanent life principle that we are in, like the field of life principles that are alive, and that for me don't seem to fit within this Judeo-Christian worldview of explaining the life and vitality like that a psychedelic experience has. It's not contained within the one as such, because you have to create a pretty elaborate construct to say like how nature and its unity is related and just tied to the one. Like that's more a abstract mathematical thing to me, and so I see them distinct. So when I think about concepts of unity, those are like the deepest ones that I naturally want to go to. And yeah, I think that all of them share similar characteristics of it's sort of, they're the source of being, they're like the ground of cosmos. They have some explanation of teleology around them and have this principle of creativity innate to them. When you think about the physicists today, it's really like nature is the ultimate source of unity, the ultimate ground. When you think about the Christian today or the spiritualist, or the Christian is thinking more to God as that unity, and for the spiritualist it might be the one. It might be a divine creator that doesn't have any kind of real contact with a lineage of people, and so that's more in the category of the one, that transcendental movement of spirit to an ascent and to a descent on an individual basis. So yeah, you have a lot of different groups which subscribe to certain ones and say that is the truth, and they don't move their ontology from there. But to give an account of like an integrated pluralism, we can look to say, hey, there's more than one view of ultimacy, and ultimately that's what matters. That's the matter of things.
Fantastic shit there, man. Really nice. I also was hearing a bit of how there is necessarily a cosmogonical in the cosmological. And while you weren't speaking as woo-woo as that, I particularly like reducing the emanations that flow from the, say, primordial immanent forms as concepts of unity. I really like that split as well. And I spend a lot of my time just kind of contemplating these foundational apprehendable or apprehensible foremost concepts as well. And also because of my more, I guess, rigorous explorations of Hinduism, been thinking more about that as well. The immediate split I saw that I think is a very obvious grounds for beginning would just be that the way that the one is treated is almost polar opposite between Eastern and Western, and this is intuitive to people that don't look into it too deeply as well. There's a Western, like the Easterns, in a mainstream sense, would speak about Aristotle here specifically as being sickly fixated on what unites the many, and like overly, just drenched in that and fixated on that, whereas the Eastern predilection is something towards what the hell splits the one, why are things not one at any given stage, and kind of closer to what I was saying about even temporally, like why isn't there unity only in every stage, and closer to the tabula rasa as being like,
And I it's
yeah.
it's a brilliant kind of distinction you make, and it's why something like Neoplatonism, which has that Silk Road pollination of East and West, is like a great way to bring them both together by saying the way that intelligibility is structured is this emanation from the one and this emergence from the many, and that we actually can go and do both ways, and that is when the thing starts to become like a wave and become musical, and that's when we get this ontology which like grounds them both.
And that's not Aristotelian, because Aristotle is finding knowledge through form and distinction, right? Very exclusively and very explicitly.
But you can't. But form is like co-determined by its matter, so it's like I still see that as I think there's a saving grace in Aristotle that is that idea, and I think that is what makes him different from Plato, if anything at all. So I think to give credit to that, I think that there is the chance for it, but it needs to be fleshed out more.
And also just read more deeply as well. In the case of Aristotle, there's a
yes. Note the
personally
metaphor fleshed out, like to the body, to bring it to the material.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the core distinction between the East and the West, and not specific to Hinduism either, would just be the difference that is that distinction reveals versus distinction conceals or dissimulates, sometimes actively distorts. Distinction is Maya, it's a veil. So best case scenario, distinction hides. Worst case scenario, distinction, actively contorts or distorts reality. I guess just paying credit to the omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent forces of nature as well. That's a really nice angle to bring in.
Yeah, like you could fractally say that each of those has within them a transcendent, omniscient, and immanent. Like, and so that fractals, and that matches Jung's architecture of the self, and that matches Hegel's dialectics of spirit. So like those Trinitarian dialectical movements is very good. I had a funny interaction with someone at work who's he's a genius. He's a genius in a quantitative sense, and he was talking about like these surveys and how how it can be so good to ask someone to pick between a binary and how to view things in this kind of mathematical way, because it can give you certainty, and like that's ultimately super important for companies making decisions about customers and looking to have a bit more certainty in that. And I asked him like he said like two, he said binaries, they're good. Like when you get to a binary, that's a really good place. And I was like, that's a big question. I said, oh, and what about trinities? Like, what about threes? Do you like threes? He's like, nope. Like, I like twos. And it was so funny, but I really feel like I connected with his essence there. Like I was able to get him. And after that, I was like, oh man, like this guy's a genius, and that's the realm that he's in. It's not about being dialectical. Like if you want to get the most out of, going for consultation with this person, you want to understand where he's coming from, which is like leveraging the utility of binaries as far as you can. And like, gosh, like everyone, like he's a complete genius. And he's not even using triples. Like imagine if he used triples and did philosophy or something. Like it would be
Yeah, because there's a warm calling and to the point of a screaming that makes the Trinity holy to us. And you do wonder, have we actually maxed out the binary, first of all? But the other thing I was going to say is, yeah, like, isn't Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva like a similar breakdown in Trinity? Like, isn't preserver, creator, destroyer the exact same thing in some sense? And in, like, I think we would be giving too much credit to different traditions by saying that they actually mean entirely, vastly different things. I don't think the progenitors of this mode of thought were like ultimately like onto a completely different plane, and they were like seeing reality itself completely differently to people on the other side of the world. I just don't believe that to be the case, anecdotally as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a great
But and that got me
addition.
thinking, is the Trinity simply the most undifferentiated that a person can fathom, which is kind of just an open-ended thought and even qualm, right? Like, it kind of annoys me that, is that just the best we can do? Like, is Trinity our pathway to like non-Trinity, to unity? Like, is there, I know there's a unity in the Trinity, but isn't this just a sickly pre-trans fallacy thing again? Like, why are the concepts of unity breaking into a three? Why can't there be a one? And I think the answer is because we couldn't, you can't deal with the truth, as Jack Nicholson said, right? We couldn't fathom it. Like, and so there's a level of differentiation and undifferentiation, and the most undifferentiated, the most dripping with inexhaustibility and ethereality is centermost, but it just like, it would kill you if you saw it.
And I guess like that's why we always think about how do we understand the Trinity from the Western lens. It's three in one, like it ascends to one, to God. You know, these Trinitarian aspects are God, and they are Christ, and they are Holy Spirit, but it's neither how does the one get to goddamn three? Like that's would be like the Eastern approach to the Trinity, but we don't ask that way. Like, we don't say how is it one and three? Like, we kind of do, and that's, but yeah, it's
When I
more
was
like
thinking
how we
about this, I
explain
wrote this
three and one.
exact thing down. I wrote, the one sits atop a throne in Eastern philosophy rather than a subject in the king's court. So the one, how the hell did that become a three, is the object of inquiry. Yeah, they completely like shifted emphasis and gravity.
And I think like, and what you're saying as well is you can't handle the truth. Like, there's partly an aspect of the tantric versus sutric form of knowledge, where in the tantric is like when you get to talk to the priest, and in the sutric is when you get to talk to the chief. And so you either get this great mythologizing and instruction on how to live, or you get the God-forsaken truth. And I think like when you look at it that lens, you can say, okay, there is certain kinds of knowledge which are just not free and available for people. One, because they're not going to understand it, but two, it's not going to be helpful for them. And so when there are kinds of knowledge like that are available to people, that it's a new mode of discourse and of thought, and the assumptions and presuppositions you can make are different, and you can hold your emotions at bay, and you're kind of required to have that training to be able to do that, and to be able to play with your identity. To have that hourglass that you can flip is the sign of the hero that can do dialectics, and you don't get access to that mystical Trinitarian understanding of three and one without having that capability first, or that insignia on you first. And yeah, it's then when you do, you know, it's at the heart of the Christianity, at the heart of the Christian metaphysics and theology is this oneness and manyness that are both contained.
And when we talk about lakshanas, and we said ear markings, right? Like Harry Potter scar and stuff. And if the commencement of the journey is a case of attunement, that brings us completely right back to Wittgenstein and philosophy first and foremost as concept and language and mode clarification rather than investigation. And so, yeah, that attunement is closer to simply removing the muddying, or like, yeah, lessening the muddiness of the waters rather than creating anew as such. And then the other analogy, or even like proverbial style quip we came up with, I really enjoyed was, yeah, neither an ascent nor a descent, but a journey to the center of the earth, but one earmarked for you, not just any journey to any center to any earth.
Yeah, it's an earmarked journey, right? It's no one's gonna understand the omens and the nods and the winks and the signs on your journey. it's a journey to the center of the earth. It's a journey to your center of your earth, but it also doesn't like make you recluse or distance you from anyone else. It actually gives you better ability to understand people on their journeys, because you can see and honor them, because you can see and honor your own one.
If reclusian dispositions are getting closer to you, that's your sign that you're not onto any journey at all.
That's why when I had this party and I had this sign and I made it so very hermetic, and being a Virgo in a house that's ruled by Hermes, I didn't make this, but I created this concept of a festival of the winter solstice and brought it to life, the Eleusinian mysteries. I was doing something that was so like pure to my journey. It was like exactly the experience that I would love to bring to someone, and I was totally like mapping it out and informing it and pouring like my essence of what I think is great and what seems to me to be like really profound, and what I think people would love to do by having, you know, the option of choice to choose to explore more of their body, their heart, or their mind. And what I was doing there was finding and spiraling the spirit inside of me that I knew other people would be able to find inside of them. And it wasn't going to be that they then come in and do something just as I thought it would be, but they would come in and take something from it and see the inspiration of me at work in that, and that would take up their own inspiration in their own lives. So there was a real synchrony and symphonic connection between my own activity and someone, like my own activity and actualization, and someone else's activity and actualization. And it was spirit that would connect them, because what was happening was this pure spirit that I was actualizing. And, you know, seeing Napoleon riding on a horseback and like seeing pure spirit, like what Hegel writes, like it was a similar thing of being a conduit for that spirit of a collective to speak through an individual and uphold the collective through the individual speak.
Absolutely. And dissolutions galore need not mean dissolution ultimately, right? And I often say there's no difference between selflessness and selfishness. And that's not to say that there is no self. It's to say that it's a non-zero sum game in matters of spirit. It's only with the complicated heuristic of, say, game A, as we've heard it called, or capitalism, sitting over an underlying substrate of basal human nature. And we're talking about the substrate here, not the substance, counterintuitively enough. But when it gets to matters like that, of substrate that births substance and spirit ultimately, that's when you know that it's ultimately non-zero sum, and your benefit, it like the thing that you were trying to stroke and stoke outwardly has to benefit the people around you. Like that's how you know that you're onto something. So yeah, kudos.
Totally. And it was a bit like this. It was a bit like me peering through a looking glass and saying, hey, why don't you come in and take a look and have a view of what we're seeing. And then, you know, you become to see you glimpse the unity, and you glimpse the spirit.
To viewers who have stuck along for this journey, I salute you. Today, I won't ask you to salute us. I salute you, because seriously, this was arduous for both of us in terms of our sickness and our unhealth.
I doubly agree with that gesture, that if you've stuck around and listened to this godforsaken episode, I wholeheartedly salute you, because this was the creme de la creme. This was such a good favorite episode. And god damn it, yeah, just taking all that we've talking about that one step higher, deepening into Aristotle. Now we're able to think with his concepts of, you know, the context of who he was as a thinker, the ways of treatment that he has for his contemporaries, the spirit of how he should be used, the concepts of substance, substrate, essence, of unity and disunity, now of potentiality and actuality. We have so much language, we have so much spirited language that is now involved and invoked, and each time we take to a discussion with that ever broadening comprehension, we get to an ever greater conclusion.
Occasioning. Yeah, there's a deepening, heightening, and exalting running all concurrently. And yeah, we did say the first half of book Iota is more thick. Our sorry asses found it to be a bit more thick, and the second half won't take nearly as long. So we'll have a decision and a discussion about how to involve the second half and the book, basically Iota 2, 3, 4, 5 onwards into the next discussion, and which of it needs to be included and which can be left out. So we will, I'm sure, somehow incorporate parts of the second half of this one as well.